Well, since the first lecture was longer than I expected, but I have to say that I'm glad that you all participated, that you were interested to discuss. Now I had to think how to present some of the things that I prepared for other two presentations, because my aim was to present the crime from gender perspective and differences between male and female crime, because this first lesson was dedicated to victimization and differences in victimization of sexes. Whereas the third part of today's lecture is gender perspective and penal policy of the courts. So I will try somehow to put this gender and crime perspective together with this penal policy, but I will focus maybe more on this reaction of criminal courts, because I saw from the discussion that you are interested very much in the way how courts deal with crimes of males and females, and especially when it comes to domestic violence. So let's start with this, but I will once again stop at moments, ask you what you think, and we can discuss, because I think it is better than you just listen to me and then to leave everything for the end of the presentation. When it comes to this penal policy of the courts, that is only one, how to say, aspect of a general reaction in one society when it comes to female crime, domestic violence, etc. So one topic could be only media representations of female crime and victimization, etc. The second could be related to all informal types of reactions, not only including media, but other factors as well. For example, you have citizens' organizations, protests, etc. And the third one would be actually formal reaction. Within this formal reaction, then once again, you have the police, you have courts, you have public prosecutors, you have prisons. So you see that, all of these aspects could be covered from a gender perspective. So in this article that is published in textbook, and that is actually material for this master program, we focused on prisons and impositions of penalties from criminal courts. Once again, we use different statistical data when it comes to penal sanctions. We use mainly two sources. One is annual penal statistics of the Council of Europe, so-called SPACE, and we have two documents. One is dedicated to imprisonment and custodial sanctions, and the second one, SPACE 2, is dedicated to non-custodial sanctions and measures. And we also use data from the European Sourcebook on Crime and Justice Statistics. And in both of these sources, we do have data for our country as well. In this chapter, in the textbook, we mainly focused on the imprisonment as a penal sanction. And once again, I will start with some general statistical data. So this is now limited to European countries. And you can see that when it comes to prison population, that in a large majority of prisoners is actually consisted of males. So approximately is 90 to 95%. So that about 5% of all prisoners are females. So that would be, of course, something like a average value, but there are differences between countries, and in some countries you have 1 to 2% of females within prisons, but in some countries this share goes up to, for example, 10%. So now this is, of course, related to female crime. We have to keep that in mind. And now I will try to relate it to this other aspect, gender perspective and crime, that in pretty much 80 to 90% all perpetrators are males, and the percentage of females, of course, varies. Approximately that is around 15%. So, of course, then the penal policy of the court has to follow these huge differences when it comes to involvement of sexes in crime. So definitely we are on the field of something that is predominantly male phenomenon. Females are really represented to a really small, extent, because if an average in Europe is about 15%, and that you know that in practically every society you have half, so about 50% of females. So definitely that crime is something related to men, and it is then interesting from the point of view of mine, so the criminology as a scientific discipline, a question whether this discipline is devoted to men, and if crime is to a large extent a male phenomenon, then is for example, true that all theories in criminology have been created in order to understand their behavior and not the behavior of females, because they are not so important in that terms, they are not so dangerous, they do not commit so serious crimes, they, for example, recidivate less often than males, etc., etc. So this is very interesting, and this gender perspective then in criminology helps us to ask questions, because if you say, I don't know, that one theory is important in understanding crime, then the question is, does that theory apply equally to males and females? Because there are, of course, differences. That's why some authors say that it's somehow a masculine discipline, right? Because it tries to explain crime of, in most cases, men. And what is now interesting, so we say, that females, they comprise the small amount, of all perpetrators, but many authors assert that in last few decades something has been changing, something has been happening in that field, that then more and more females commit crimes, and that we can see that in respect to prisons in the increase of female prison population. In the United States, in some European countries as well, we can see an increase in females. So that's now the question, what is happening? Does that have to do with real changes in behavior? We could ask, have females, become more violent, or what is, problem? Or does it have to do with different approach of those who are in charge of prosecuting and imposing and discovering in the first place crimes, and then imposing penal sanctions? For example, I can't talk about in details on situations in other European countries, but I can give you an example for Serbia. And that is that when it comes to domestic violence, so generally domestic violence is crime, not just intimate partner violence, that we have an apparent increase of reported females for that crime. So it's not just that this law that we enacted on protection on domestic violence affected males, and there is an increase of, 100% of reported males for domestic violence, but there is an observable and apparent increase in females. So in absolute numbers, it is absolutely true, and we don't need to discuss that males comprise the majority. But once again, when you see the percentages, this increase for females is even higher than for males. This is very, very interesting. Do you think, or what do you think could be an explanation? So in real numbers, we have, for example, let's say 2,000 men reported each year, and then an increase of, 50 or 100%. When it comes to females, numbers are much smaller. Well, let's say 100, 200, not 1,000. But if you have then 400 reported females, that is a large increase. So that is something, I don't have the statistical data, but that's something that's happening in respect to crime that we could say that is really a gender-related crime, but affects females as well. Does that mean that females are violent also in that context? Does that mean that the attitude and the reaction has changed, or what? So this is... for example, one thing that is interesting, authors who analyze this problem of increasing female prison population, they point to other crimes, so not just domestic violence. They point, for example, to drug-related crimes, to some property crimes, etc., to, for example, less serious bodily injuries, and they say that gender gap is not so huge when it comes to these less serious forms, but when it comes to other crimes, that difference is more evident to say. So obviously that and I will talk a little bit more about that later on, but that these laws affect both sexes, and you have, I mentioned this is domestic violence. So you have now cases where, for example, daughters report their mothers report their daughters, or, other relations within family between, or of course, husbands, for example, report now their wives, etc. So something is happening also with this female population. So when it comes to percentages of this prison population, it is once again important to make a distinction, to say there are different categories. It's not true that in all countries this prison population of females has increased in past years. So, for example, we have here this document Space 1. These are data of the Council of Europe, and you can see actually 3 different categories of countries. I highlighted countries that are involved in this project just to see where we stand. And the first category is comprised of countries where this prison population increased. But remember, this increase is in this period 2005-2015. We have no data for later years. So we are together, for example, with Germany or Sweden in this category. But there are also countries where you didn't have this increase in female prison population, and also countries where you have a stable situation and nothing has changed in that 10-year period. So once again, it is we should be cautious. So when we read this, that there is an increase in female crime, there is an increase in prison population, because yes, there is, but in some countries, not in all countries. What I of course don't know what's the situation in all of these European countries, but I do know what is happening in Serbia and what could be the explanation, for example, for Serbia. In this period, so 2005-2015, we had not just the increase on female prison population, but increase of general prison population. That is due to many repressive legal solutions that we wanted to accept and to enact. I will give you some numbers just to see the situation in the country right now. So on the beginning of this period, we had 100 prisoners per 100,000 population. Today, it is approximately 150. So we have to, of course, spend money for new prisons and to find places for all of them. But at least when our country is about, so we also have similar trends. So it's something that affects both males and females when it comes to this prison population. Now, in order to understand penal policy of the courts, we have to take into account what are the characteristics of female crime. And I have mentioned several times that there are differences. First of all, that females are less involved in criminal activities. Generally, there are different explanations for that. Then you can see on this slide, these are data from European Sourcebook on Crime and Justice Statistics, and I put here average percentages for concrete crimes. And these, so in brackets, you have percentage of females who are convicted for certain criminal offenses. So homicide, assault, etc., etc. So you can see, for example, that when it comes to rape, when it comes to child sexual abuse and sexual assault generally, that the involvement of females, the share of convicted females is approximately 1.5%. When it comes to homicides, almost 10%, but this is something general. So for all European countries that do send their reports to be published in this crime and justice statistics. And what we can see here, for example, money laundering or fraud and cyber fraud. So these are crimes that are actually crimes against property or economy. So the main aim of these crimes actually to obtain profit. And you can see differences. So obviously that when it comes to these crimes, we have more females in comparison to violent crimes or especially these sexual crimes and etc. When it comes, for example, to theft, it is 15%. Robbery is also interesting crime to compare because although robbery in criminal code is in the group against property, we actually think that this is violent crime in criminology because you use force or you threat by using force in order to obtain profit. So that's why we perceive it as a violent crime. And you see that in that respect, you have also involvement of females. But I say this is a general picture and there are huge differences between countries. And how is then possible to explain what are these differences? I will give you some data just to see what are these differences. I have here just a second. Homicide, for example. So this is average 9.5 in 2015, but in some countries, for example, Austria and Finland, you have approximately 15-16, whereas in other countries, for example, in Turkey and Albania, that is approximately 2 to 3%. Another example is fraud. I mentioned that crime. And for example, in Germany, the share of females convicted of this crime was almost 35%. 35%. In England and Wales, 33%. In Switzerland, 32%. On the other side, we have, for example, Georgia, where the share of females who were convicted of this crime was less than 1%. So there are huge differences, not just when it comes to general crime rate, general rate of convicted females, but when it comes to concrete criminal offenses. And now we have actually, two explanations when it comes to female crime and differences in increase or decrease, etc. One explanation is actually feminist explanation, and feminists, the most simply way say, with emancipation of females, we can expect more equalities even when it comes to crime. So with emancipation, we should then expect to see more females commit crimes that are, regularly male behavior, and that is what they thought that will happen in countries that go through these processes, faster and better. But when it comes to studies and conducted research, things are a little bit different. Conducted research that included different European countries show what? They show that in countries where we do have these emancipation processes and they say liberalization of females, something has happened, but only in respect to certain criminal offenses. And that are mostly offenses against property, economy, for example, occupation-related crimes, because if you have changes in society and if more females, for example, are employed, then they will get maybe more chances to commit crimes. Others say this emancipation process will be definitely connected with more single mother families, due to higher rates of divorce. And then statistical data show that for them it is much more difficult in these financial terms to raise their children, for example, alone without the help of partners, etc. And that would be a pressure, and for some, the explanation to commit these property crimes. On the other hand, they say in these countries where we have this process of emancipation, we should expect, and the data confirm this, less involvement in serious violence. How is this explained? Well, if woman has a possibility to divorce, to leave her violent partner, to get social support, to get, for example, financial support of the state, to be provided, for example, with the apartment where she can go, not just safe houses, but apartment for her and her children, then she is in a better position than in traditional patriarchal societies where we do not have this emancipation process to the same extent. And then we should expect that in these societies we have maybe more violent crimes. And we saw when I had this first lesson, then females, when they commit homicide, that in most cases they actually kill their abusive partners. So they have been previously suffering, they have been previously victimized. That is what I said, responsive violence. They think that there is no other option. They don't feel secure, even if you, for example, impose that measure, restrictive measure, and you forbid a perpetrator to approach the victim or to live with victim in the same household. What can happen in practice? He goes and waits for her in front of her job where she works, that building, or he knows, for example, that she is at her parents' home, and then he goes there because he's not forbidden from going to that home, and then kill them all. Because we had such cases in our country.
Yes, recently.
Yes, we have such cases. So even though, for example, he had this imposed restrictive measure, and very often, and I pointed to that in this research on homicides in Belgrade, it happens that after he kills them or her, he commits suicide. Well, the explanation is better that she's that than to be with another man, etc. So then this how it is called liberalization or emancipation thesis in criminology points to differences in societies that go through, different stages of this emancipation process, and that would then lead us to, once again, this gender equality and how it is related to female and male crime. That I don't want to assert that females commit crimes only under these circumstances. We had other cases as well. We had cases of, homicides committed by juveniles or females that are not in a relationship, etc. But dominantly, when they do commit homicide, you have this, typical situation of actually intersection between victimization and then violent behavior. Larissa, please.
Are we here dealing only with the how should I say this category of intentional homicides? But what about the homicides from self-defense? So we have situation where the homicide was committed as an act of violence happening in that particular moment, and we have homicides where women killed when they were sleeping, their men when they were sleeping.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't see this distinction. So if you can comment about it.
You see, it is when it comes to this comparative view, you have in this European source book on crime and justice statistics definitions. So, what is definition accepted and what are different solutions in some countries? And then they explain what countries do report under this category of intentional homicide. If it was self-defense, I don't know, have you participated in lessons of criminal law, but self-defense means there is no crime. Yeah, it should be acquittal and not conviction statistics. It should be maybe in the number of reported for crimes, but not convicted. That's how it should be. I say it should be because the other thing, what is happening in practice, and how often do courts do accept this self-defense. Self-defense as an excuse. When it comes to the other situation that you mentioned, and that is what if they kill their spouses, for example, while they are asleep, then I suppose that in many situations courts would qualify that as an aggravated homicide. But that is intentional homicide. So there is no difference between, to say, homicide and aggravated homicide. You have intentional, and there is one more table in this source, and these are I think attempted murders, attempted homicides. They also have data in that respect. So these could be the differences. But I also want to mention that in many cases it happens that females have the role of an accomplice. So that they, when they commit crimes, that they help their men who are the main perpetrators. So their role is in many cases, a subsidiary in criminal law terms, that is an accomplice, right? So someone who helps the main perpetrator, etc. That is also something to keep in mind. And the other explanation when it comes to this larger, involvement of females in crime and conviction rates and prison rates would actually relate not to the real behavior and what has changed, and to this, for example, emancipation thesis, but it would be connected to formal social reaction. how people who work within this formal system, criminal justice system, treat cases in which females commit crimes. You have, for example, in accordance with this law on protection and domestic violence, we introduced competent police officers who, when reported case, when they have reported case, have to go to the scene, right, of crime, and then to make a risk assessment and to say whether there is a risk of an immediate violence to happen or not. And it would be interesting to research that a little bit more and to see differences when it comes to males and females. But, they can sometimes be in the situation to say, when it comes to less serious forms, etc., I can't decide who is guilty here, who did what, and then report both of them, etc. That could be one explanation for this increase. Okay, so this... the second actually explanation has to do not just with the behavior of those who work within this criminal justice system, but also it has to do with definition of crimes. Whether these crimes are defined in a vaguely or too broad way, then you can include, different situations, that there is no something strict to know how to apply. That all affects how these legal norms will be later on applied. So it doesn't have to be related to real change in females' behavior, but it can be related to this reaction. And that's what you said. That reaction is something that is also very important. It would be good if we, for example, in our country, would have a national victimization survey, and then you could get data from citizens to make, for example, a telephone survey. It has also its limitations, but still. And then to ask respondents, have you been victims, for example, in previous 5 years, or your family members? And to get, these data and then to compare them with something that is official, what you have as official statistics. Because if they are reluctant to report, if they fear, etc., that doesn't mean that this is not happening. And that's why the comparison of both sources would be good, but unfortunately we don't have that. So we have to rely either on this statistical data or research conducted by researchers, etc. So when it comes to this. When it comes to this explanation, that it's not that females have become more violent, or that they have started committing more crimes, but that has to do with actually general penal policy. We see, for example, that not just in our country, but in many other countries as well, in the past decade at least, we opt for more repressive and severe legal solutions. So when it comes to criminal code, what has happened, what has changed, at least in our country in the last 10 years? We introduced life-term imprisonment. Life-term imprisonment without parole in certain cases. That was highly criticized by the professors of criminal law. But still, this is something that was enacted. Then we had limitation of mitigation of penalty. In some cases, for example, when it comes to aggravated homicide, there is no possibility for the court to mitigate, so to impose penalty that is below the minimum level. Do you understand me what I'm talking about? If the minimum level is, for example, 10 years, there is a possibility, if wants to mitigate the court, the judge, to go, for example, to 7 years. That would be the limit. Now, for certain crimes, that is forbidden in the criminal code. Also highly criticized. Why? Because then if you have, for example, attempted homicide, aggravated homicide, there is no possibility for something like that. How does that affect females? Does that affect females? Do we think of possible, differences maybe in sentencing and what will happen in practice when we want to enact these solutions? And the other question is, we have moral panics to say when a hideous crime happens in our society. We testified that 1 month ago when 2 hideous crimes were committed by whom? Male or female? In both cases, we had males. In both cases. When we had case 10 years ago when a teenager girl was killed, and after that we introduced life-term imprisonment. I don't know whether you remember, that was 10 years ago. Who killed her? It was once again male.
Are we speaking of Lukić case?
Yes.
Yeah, male.
Once again. So whenever we have these, citizens' reactions, demands that something be changed, and that is in the field of criminal law, you see that these are the most serious crimes and that you have male perpetrators in most cases, and then you have very often female victims, or at least you have children as completely, of course, innocent victims. That is something that will cause panic in every society, if you have innocent children as victims. And then you say, all right, we have to stop this violence, we have to do something, and then of course everything goes in this repressive direction, and then you come to the legal solutions that will after that apply to female perpetrators as well. So, and do we think about these relations? I think that the answer would be females are not important in that terms because they are not dangerous, they do not commit serious crimes, they represent a small share of all reported, convicted, 5% in prisons, etc., etc. But imagine now the situation, you have this, and we talked about this battered woman syndrome, and she suffers for I don't know how long abusive behavior of her partner, and at one moment she decides to kill him, and then this situation that she kills him while he sleeps, etc., and you come to a conclusion after that in court proceedings that she has committed aggravated homicide. Imagine that she didn't kill him, that she didn't succeed, and that he survived, that he was brought to hospital and that he survived. That would be, if we qualify her behavior, it would be attempted aggravated homicide. In all situations, attempt should be taken into account by the judge to mitigate the penalty, right? But if you excluded that possibility, and now that is the current legal solution, you can say she has to get at least 10 years of imprisonment. What do you think about that?
Well, it's obvious that there should be some kind of debates regarding this gender sensitivity toward the criminal law, when any law should be passed or new repressive measures taken into consideration. All these data, statistics, and what we have should be taken into consideration. So that is one question. So one society, even though you said previously that we should look on other societies and only think in our context, one society found its way to deal with that. So they introduced this battered woman syndrome. So that is one option. It doesn't mean that we should completely copy-paste it. we should think within the confines of our experiences. But this kind of data specifically about violence, gender-based violence, should be taken into consideration when these cases happen. So that is my opinion, and I would.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't have to be related only to the most serious crimes, because and there is a list of crimes for which you cannot mitigate a penalty, so go under this minimum of prescribed penalty. And then if you have females who commit these crimes, so these politics, how to say, and these solutions will and have to affect equally all, because in front of the law and the courts, at least when it comes to legal solutions, you cannot say she's a female and then I will then mitigate, the penalty when the code excludes that possibility for all offenders.
I don't mean she's a female, she will be acquitted, but she's heavily abused.
No. I talk about situations, for example, if she commits drug-related crime, not about battered woman syndrome. I know that there are, for example, in Australia, you have legal solutions, and they can widely interpret self-defense in order to include this, or they say this is diminished culpability, so to say that she not that she's insane, but that this culpability is just diminished. Okay. Sorry, just to see whether someone wrote anything. Would any of online participants would like to say or comment or to express its opinion? I don't see that anyone raised hand. No? One more thing, and maybe more examples when it comes to this, how legal solutions affect, differently males and females. When we decided to enact this law on domestic violence protection, it was a good, of course, idea, but the only measures that we prescribed are actually two measures. So you can impose a restrictive measure so that perpetrator cannot approach the victim and communicate with the victim, or that he is forbidden from living together with the victim. But is that enough? And how this will affect females? All right, you get he's out of the house for some time, for example, for 1 month. He's angry because of that. He's angry because he has no place where to go, where to sleep, to I don't know, live regularly and to do regular activities, and he wants to revenge, etc. But in that respect, I think that the family code offers better solutions, because then the question is, should we, for example, think of the possibility to include something else that would really help these victims of domestic violence? So not just these restrictive measures, that the aim was, immediately to stop violence and to protect the victim, but should we, for example, impose something else, like going to psychotherapy, or I don't know, to program because he has problem with alcohol abuse, and that is something that is widespread, really widespread. I go with my students every year to visit a prison in Belgrade. Actually, that is the largest detention unit, not just prison, but there is within the same building, there is one more institution, and that is Special Prison Hospital. And there is department for those who are addicted to alcohol, and they receive their treatment there. In many cases, these are persons who have committed domestic violence, and they need treatment, and it is very difficult to work with them. And people who work in social service and say that they say, okay, we wait to go out and then to abuse alcohol again, etc., etc. So that's a problem. That's a real problem in many cases. With restrictive measures, you will protect the victim immediately, and when it comes to, for example, her home, but if she goes out, that can be a problem. And you do nothing in respect to improvement, when it comes to offender. And he definitely needs, in many cases, something to be done, not just to be restricted and to be forbidden to come close, etc., etc. So I think that we should take this into account, and we now have many legal solutions that affect females. If you do that from time to time, criminal legislator, you increase penalties for many crimes. For many crimes, you say it's not enough, or you limit the possibility for probation. Now it is, if I'm not wrong, it's not more 10 years, but 8 years. If you have possibility to impose 8 years of imprisonment, there is no probation. Will that affect females? Yes, it will. But we want repressive measures. We want everything in that direction. And it is interesting how this has implications in practice.
So I believe that you will speak later on also about that, but that's obviously is not enough. That obviously repressive measures cannot solve the problem, the causes of the problem. So the cultural violence within society expressed differently at school, in the public sphere, in media, in the political bodies, in the parliament, etc., etc. So the cultural violence and measures against or measures for overcoming the all-encompassing cultural violence, for which I dare to say, unfortunately, that currently in our society has been promoted even from the top of the state, but not only from the top, within media, within
institutions.
And so please, so I just want to say that I would like to hear at the end or whenever something more about this, but I believe that you will do that.
Well, that is now a more general topic to say how to resolve these problems. Yes, one thing is to talk about violence in media and in everyday communication between people, etc. But in schools, there is something that we can do in that respect when it comes to criminal law, yes. But when it comes to this topic that I want to emphasize, we have accepted repressive measures. So I'm talking about criminal code, when it comes to not respecting the other person and behave aggressively, you have also solutions for that in criminal code. The problem is application, maybe. But criminal law solutions are, they are not lenient. I just want to emphasize that. They are not, I'm not talking about juveniles, there's something else is about juveniles. But when it comes to adult offenders, you really do have, I think, repressive enough means when it comes to criminal code to apply. But I just say when you increase all of that, penalties and the limit possibilities for more lenient penalties, etc., that will affect females. And that is one of the explanation why then you have, for example, larger population of females within prisons. and they face many problems when in prisons, etc. So just say that everything is that respect. You want to solve one problem, and that's why I mentioned, because when we do react, in many cases we have problem of male violence. We want to solve that, and then, we don't think how this will affect female crime, just that.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on this and to agree with you about the subsequent measures that should be taken after in cases of domestic violence, and this prohibition of approach to the victim, etc. It should be coupled with the psychotherapy, with mandatory either process within the institution or whatever that is. Because now when we were talking, we had a meeting regarding the juvenile violence and inside the schools. So we were talking about the potential introduction of, potential to suspend a student from the school who is the perpetrator of continuous violence inside the school. And what is coupled with that is the imposed measure of therapy. So we will not only suspend, he or she needs to go to the therapy. And if the parents don't want to agree into that, one of the propositions was that then the therapist will be allocated outside, the external therapist, so outside of the school, that would need to be paid from parents' side. So these are things that are, this is in connection with this, what do we do? Because we need to re-socialize that person. If we think, yes, we all agree that juveniles can be re-socialized, but can we also re-socialize the older people? Can they go through some programs that will, again, incorporate them into the society? So that's,
Well, that's a hard question, and difficult question to answer, because you have those who don't want to change and who say, yes, I abuse my wife and my children, I'll be in prison, I will go out and continue with that, or here at the therapy, what I mentioned, this special prison hospital, etc. They don't want to change their habits. So sometimes, you are faced with that, and we see problems in practice with that. But I'm glad that you mentioned this, resocialization and not just elimination. Yes. Because, you cannot put them in prisons forever, all of them. Think about that the majority of prisoners will get out sooner or after, because the most of them are not in prisons for the life term. And that's the situation with domestic violence. They will get out.
Yeah, because, if they go I had the situation where I became I understand how the system of alcohol treatment functions in this in our institutions, and how that program is very strict. What it entails, how it looks, and how the whole process goes. Of course, we have recidivists. That happens. But when it comes to psychotherapy and to resocialization, in most of the cases of this violence, perpetrators is that what I said before, they were abused when they were children. So uncovering their traumas, etc., will resensitivize in some cases those people, and acknowledging the trauma they went through. So it's part of what psychotherapists will do. That's one question. Another question is, for those that won't ever change, was there any discussion that maybe state should enable victims of this kind of violence, which was coupled with the threat of life threats to children and women, should somehow state enable them the change of identity and the change of location and everything as a measure? I don't know.
Yes, as far as this protection of a victim is concerned, you have measures within criminal proceedings. For example, how to protect the victim during court trials, etc. But that is very interesting questions that you ask, because the question is actually who helps the victims of domestic violence mostly. How many state services do we have? Yes, we do have these safe houses, etc. But the large part of this support is on non-governmental sector. So that is also the question: what else could be done in that respect? Is this enough? To they be in safe houses and that's it? So I think that there is a room for improvement, and that is what I mentioned several times. It's not just like a criminal code is some magical tool, and that restrictive measures will solve the problem. You need a lot more than that. Some countries, but that all has to do also with financial sources. Not that there is no enough finances, but things where are directed. They could be used in order to, for example, to help them to find them homes, etc., not to be in safe houses. But that is one direction to think about. The other is what we mentioned when it comes to the psychotherapy and problems with alcohol, etc., etc. So that will not help only the offenders, but you try to solve the problem of violence, and to help victims if it is possible. And if it is possible to do that with third of them, it is a good result. I mean, you cannot expect to change them all, and we cannot live in a society without crime and without homicides. But if you can change some of them, and you can help not to repeat violence, yes. What Professor mentioned when it comes to media and all other social factors, yes, that is also really important to say, slapping a partner or a family member, that is domestic violence. It's not just I didn't do that, I just slapped. It's not just slap, that is also physical violence. But you have to promote that,
I wanted to add also something. I think that people think that that is the easiest way to just change this penalty politics. I agree with you that those measures that you mentioned are not enough, and I'm especially concerned about the supervisory of this ban of protection, the victim. And I think that we should be focused on the way that we apply these measures, also with this therapy thing, that these therapists are really gender sensitive, that they're really well trained in order to have some solution, some well end.
This is related to consequences of domestic violence, and maybe at first glance we see physical injuries, psychological traumas, etc. But there is a burden, when it comes to the state. You have to employ enough competent police officers to deal with 25,000 cases per year.
To simply invest.
You have to invest in that, yes. That is the 25,000 reported. And then you have to make a risk assessment for every case. And then to decide whether to impose restrictive measure or not, and how to supervise that. And it's not an easy task. But still, when it comes to statistical data, they also see differences between categories of offenders. They are the ones who, repeat, and they do not respect these measures, but you have the other category that does. So this is something that needs more research, at least when our country is about. What is interesting about this sentencing is that especially feminists, they say that female offenders are generally being treated more leniently than men when they commit crimes and when they are in front of the courts. And they say this is some kind of a paternalistic attitude toward females, chivalry, that, females are to be protected, that they need care, and they are not, they should not be treated as, severely as men who commit crimes. So now it's a question whether this is good or bad. If it is true that when do commit crime, that females get, more lenient treatment, is this something that should be criticized or not? If they, of course, commit same crimes, we have to keep in mind, of course, that there are differences between crimes and the prescribed penalties, but is this something that should be criticized or not? Because if you want, gender equality, and to say, but they are not equal, but females are treated more leniently. This is something interesting. Of course, to some extent, this could be explained by differences. What we said about differences in crime between males and females, then the presence of other factors as well. But this is something, especially in feminist work, that is asserted that they have more, benevolent treatment when it comes to courts and imposing penal sanctions. Now, what could be the explanation for this? And I will give you also data for Serbia in order to see differences in punishment, right, of males and females. First of all, it's once again, we cannot take into account only gender, and many authors point to race as well. So you can see once again this intersectional approach, and then they will give data when it comes to, for example, black females, that they, for example, receive tougher penalties in comparison to white or Hispano females, example in United States of America, etc., when commit same crimes. So it's not only that it has to do with gender, but we have to take this into account. Then what is also explored is the level of education and employment, but the results of the studies conducted are, different and point to different treatment. It's not that we can say that level of education and employment has to do a lot with these sentences, but still I would take this into account as well. But maybe more when it comes to certain crimes, when it comes to less serious crimes, when it comes to crimes against, for example, economy, etc. So yes, not so much when it comes to maybe violent crimes. But this is something also that should be taken into account when analyzing whether there are differences in sentencing of males and females. Types of crime committed, that is what we already said. Dependent children, this is something interesting. Some authors say that if a female has dependent children, then judges will take this into account and say, all right, she has the children to take care of, how this, sentence would affect the children, and maybe this is something that they take into account. But conducted research show actually that this is something that is taken into account for both males and females. And you will find that if you had some kind of experience with criminal court verdicts, they usually make a list of all mitigating circumstances. Among them is in many cases whether a perpetrator has a family or children. Of course, this is not the case when it comes to crimes against children, but in other cases, this is something that should be treated, positive or benevolently, because, it is a person who has a family, who has children, and then, the imprisonment sentence, for example, would affect her or his life, etc., etc. just to give you an example, in our country, there is one prison for females. Prison, not detention centers. Detention centers you have in many cities, but prison is one in the city of Požarevac. And now imagine females who are there, and their family members, for example, who live somewhere in the north of the country or in the south, they have the right to visit their mother or spouse, etc. But how possible in financial terms is that for many of them? Just one thing, we could mention when it comes to female prison. So this is something that is taken maybe into account. Guilt in female offenders, this could be related to the role of committed crimes. I said something more about that. But some feminists say that females are sometimes being treated as mentally disturbed, or it's not mentally insane, but mentally disturbed in terms of different approaches and different treatment to males and females, especially when it comes to substance abuse, depression, anxiety, etc. So they then say they need treatment, more treatment. We have to treat them like they are sick and not intentional perpetrators who calculate what are the pros and cons of committing a crime. So that would be assessment of guilt. Then what is also very interesting is to see what type of crime has female committed. If it is something to say typical or something that it would be approved within one society, something that is allowed for females, something that should be treated as acceptable behavior, that would be one situation. And the other one would be, imagine, for example, a female who is terrorist. That is not something that is double deviance. It's not just that she deviates from her feminine role and commits a crime, but she commits something that is predominantly male behavior. And then this is the type of crime, not just how the criminal code sees crimes in respect to prescribed penalties, but also how the society looks at certain criminal behaviors of females. So it wouldn't be, appropriate for a female to commit a robbery or to commit these terrorist attacks, or for example, imagine the situation if she abuses her partner. That is not, typical. That is, something not to expect. So this is the explanation how to consider a crime of a female as a double deviance. And I found some research that tried to compare these situations. And what did they do? They analyzed homicide, and they analyzed homicide that was committed together by one at least male and one female. So you had complices in these cases. Why they did that? To see what would be the imposed penalty when female together with other male or together with other female committed homicide. And they came to a conclusion that still in these cases females do get more lenient penalties. It's very interesting. So when it comes to homicides, I asked also for our country data for homicides, and it really happens that female gets the most severe imprisonment term, very, very rarely. So this is and influence of gender equality. So there is no, much evidence that this thesis could be confirmed, but still some authors point to this, that gender equality would affect these court decisions. So in societies where we have more gender equality, that we should expect more lenient approach to female offenders. But I don't know, this is what some say, but this definitely, I wouldn't say this is absolutely truth. It probably depends as usual, and probably is different from country to country. So a little bit of statistics. Here we have in this, you can't find this on statistical data office presentation. I asked them to send me this data because I wanted to compare males and females. And that's why it's for this period, 2012-2016, because in 2016 I did this research. I wanted you to see the difference when it comes to imposition of penal sanctions when it comes to males and females. So the first graph here, you have the green one, that is probation. And these are sentences for females. So we see that there is approximately 2/3, so around 60 or even more, sometimes almost 70% of all imposed penalties for females. When it comes to imprisonment, you have, for example, we see here around 20% or 20% of all sentenced females so go to prison. Then we have fine. Fine is approximately 10%, and other penal sanctions. Other penal sanctions in these 2 years include house arrest as well, so house prison, how I would translate it so precisely. When it comes to men, you see differences because around 50% of all men do receive probation, and look at the imprisonment percentages. So it is 30, 35, almost 40. And in these 2 years, things have changed because of this house arrest, and it is here in this red column. But approximately, so you have around 30% of males who are deprived of their liberty. So definitely there are some differences between males and females, and we could say that generally, all right, there is a difference. But we can see here that the differences when it comes to length of imprisonment in our country. So green one is for males and blue for females. Up to 6 months, the length of imprisonment, you see difference between sexes. And these are, at that moment, the longest sentences of imprisonment that could be imposed. And when it comes to this, what is today life term, that is between 13 and 40, in all cases, actually, we had male offenders. That is understandable if we keep in mind these differences between crimes, and if we keep in mind the fact that when females kill, once again, that is usually related to their previous victimization and something that the courts will take into account. But it would be, as I said, interesting to see who are the victims of these crimes. So when you have the most severe imposed penalties, and whether there are differences when it comes to different victims, so females and males. This would be something interesting to analyze. And now you can see the differences in punishment when it comes to concrete criminal offenses or groups. This is the share of imprisonment, so it doesn't have to do with the length, but only the share of imprisonment. The first category where we have homicide, aggravated homicide, bodily injuries, etc. So you see pretty much there are no differences when it comes to punishment of males and females. Slightly, more males get imprisonment than females. But you have to keep in mind that courts are here, how to say, limited, restricted. If you have serious crimes, there is no other possibility than to impose imprisonment. So there is no possibility for the probation. The possibility would, of course, exist when it comes to less serious bodily injuries. So this is, or some kinds of then crimes against marriage and family. And you see differences here. In this group, we have actually two crimes that are dominant. One is domestic violence, and the other crime is refusing to give alimony. And we have that really a problem with males who don't want to pay alimonies, and this is a crime. So this is something that is also very widespread and not just domestic violence. And you can see that although we have assertions and, that females have become more violent, that they are being reported more often for domestic violence, but still males receive imprisonment to a larger extent. And this could be also, I believe, explained by the fact that when they do commit this crime, consequences are just tougher than when females commit these crimes. It would be necessary to have detailed data to compare. We cannot obtain that from these official statistics, but I suppose that this would be an explanation. When it comes to property crimes, you see that they receive imprisonment much more often than females. But it is interesting when it comes to crimes against the economy that they are equal. So imprisonment is used as an option in 20% of cases, so for both males and females. So this would be, for example, tax evasion. This is the most widespread crime within this group. There are other crimes as well, but this is the only category of all analyzed that we see this, equality. Why I also chosen this group, crime against health, because the literature says that many females have started to commit more often drug-related crimes. And this is the group of drug-related crimes. It's not just illegal possession, but you have also illegal production and illegal trade, etc. But still, we have the difference between males and females. I just so this is general picture, but I would definitely explain these differences in terms of seriousness of the crime, previous criminal records. So that would be something I would take into account, and more aggravated forms. Once again, when we talked about domestic violence, we said, all right, females also commit this crime, but when it comes to the most serious forms, you will predominantly have males as perpetrators. We have no so detailed data to see whether, the committed crime was a basic form or aggravated form. Therefore, we need a detailed research and to analyze every single verdict to know, but just to see that still there are, of course, differences in that respect. When it comes to our prison population of females, I just wanted to mention the numbers. So I chose this year, 2006, because that was the year when the current criminal code entered into force. This was the number of female prisoners in our country, and you see the number today. So after 15 or 17 years, so we do have an increase in female prison population. There are differences. You see, for example, that 30% of those who are in prisons were previously convicted, and whereas that is the case for 54 of all men. So once again, that they obviously in their criminal careers, they do have more crimes. And since the general rate of recidivism for females is 20%, definitely that is something that affects court decisions. And okay. age of female and male prisoners. What is here important, the percentage of convicted women older than 40 years is almost 50%, and that is twice as high in comparison to the same age category in prisons. So these are just some characteristics, but to review a little bit this, how to say, lesson, how I have this one, education. The overall percentage of convicted with high education is twice as big as the share of women with the same education level in prisons. That is the intersectional approach, maybe that has to do with social class and not just gender. Anyway, I want to review a little bit. So this lesson to point that you have to think of differences between crimes of males and females. That some theories point actually to this patriarchal model and masculinity values, and that could be one of the most important explanations for these differences. In this textbook, you will read another theoretical explanation when it comes, for example, to, I don't know, raising children, what are parent styles in respect to daughters and respect to sons, etc. So there is a lot other things also to read. So that all of that has to do with this criminal court penal sanctions, and we have to think of criminal courts not just of the institutions that do apply criminal code, but some say gender institutions, in respect that these institutions are social institutions and that the judges, they have, how to say, their perceptions on some values, on gender roles, etc. You have a lot of research that aims at finding possible differences, for example, in treatment of offenders of domestic violence in rural area, for example, and in urban area, and whether there are differences when it comes to these courts' penal sanctions. How do they perceive similar situations and crimes, etc. So that is one more thing maybe to mention, and therefore it is not important only to take into account, as I mentioned, the type of crime, recidivism rate, but also to include this crime as a double deviance, females as persons who need protection, who are mentally disturbed, etc., who are caregivers, who are mother, who have children, and then, evaluation of that role. Has she fulfilled that role? Some would say, for example, that single females, those who have no family, children, will maybe affect this court decision, etc. So there is a lot of factors to be taken into account. We broadly categorize them into legal and extra legal, but you will also read that in this text.
Just to add, it was very much considered within the course feminist judgments. But just to mention also here, because it's essentially connected to the criminal court judges, so biases of the judges and training of judges and the gender sensitization of judges, all of these have to be taken into consideration, because depending on all of this, what I mentioned, the quality and character of penalties we will have as the result.
That is absolutely true, but it is very difficult to conduct research to see. It would be great if we could have answers from, I don't know, judges and other officials, and then to see differences maybe between courts, but this is pretty much difficult to achieve. But definitely that it must have and to affect the decisions to some extent. So, any questions? comments. Jedan i 25. Aha. Sorry, there are some messages. I will now try to see what did you write while I was speaking. Mm-hmm. So we have a question here. Should gender-based violence, especially femicide, be included in the penal code as a separate crime? If I'm not mistaken, this has been done in Latin American countries. Spain, for example. Does anything like this is under consideration in Serbia? What do you think about this as a legal expert? I think that I mentioned this was a question that was asked, I think 2 hours ago, but we didn't see it. I said something about this introduction of femicide. I would previously, would like to see what we currently have in practice, because it is, as Joanna said, for example, it is the most easiest way to, introduce new crime, to change criminal code. That is not really difficult to achieve, because we see that our criminal code has been changed many times in past decade and a half. But I would like to see the results of research that would include punishment of offenders for homicide and in different contexts, and when we have females as victims, males as victims, with, of course, taking into account other circumstances such as previous criminal record, etc. I would just like to see the current picture, because that is what the aim of criminology should be. You want something to change, all right, but you need data, research, explanation, and then based on that, you should decide, all right, there is a room for this or that, we should introduce this legal solution or that legal solution. Now, currently, there are some aggravated homicides, if I'm not wrong, for domestic violence. If the victim was previously abused within this context and then killed, that is an aggravated homicide. So this is partially, it is covered. Not all cases, of course, because I said at the beginning that femicide goes beyond only, this situation of domestic violence. But at least when it comes to our society, this would be pretty much more common than, for example, honor killings. So I wouldn't opt for any solution without previously taking into account the current judicial practice. And why I say so? I compared criminal courts practice in respect to the most severe term of imprisonment in last 3 decades. I will tell you what is the difference in the last 2 decades. So from 2000 to 2010, the percentage for homicide and aggravated homicide, the percentage of the most severe imprisonment, and that is 30 to 40 years, was 4.5%. So of all penalties imposed, imprisonment penalties imposed for homicide and aggravated homicide, the percentage of those harshest was 4.5. In the last decade, so from 2010 to 2020, this percentage was 7.7. What that shows us that our courts have also become more repressive when it comes to imposition of penalties. So that is almost double, not double, but from 4.4% to 7.7% of this longest term of imprisonment for homicide and aggravated homicide. And that's why I would like to see then maybe possible differences when it comes to female and male victims. But without that, I, wouldn't, say yes or no, because it's the easiest to say, yes, we want, the protection, but let's see, I don't know, in what number of cases was the killing of female qualified as aggravated homicide and as, just homicide. We need all of that, and then that would be open space for discussion and to, suggesting solution whether to introduce that or not. Because if we don't want to see what is the practice and what is the situation, I mean, what's the point with then criminological research? So that only that would be a precondition to say something about that. We have one comment. I will read it. It's not a question. I think even if some men have violent tendencies, some only act on it because they are in a position of power over their female partner. That could be related with the theory I mentioned of resources, that the person who has more resources within a relationship then behaves, like that is allowed for him usually or her to do, to use violence as well. So that was a comment. And yes, of course, if you have questions, please be free to ask or write if it is easier for you in chat. I now look at these messages, so if you have something more to add, to comment, to ask. Is there any need for someone to possess any weapon at all? I also think that police officers don't need to possess any weapon if they are not on duty. They can go from home to work. Well, yes, this is, of course, completely another issue that is related to firearms and how they are used in homicides. If I'm not wrong, when it comes to our country, that is a problem. And I think that between 30 and 50%, and that depends from year, of all homicides have been committed by using guns. And in many of these cases, perpetrators were in illegal possession of these firearms. So yes, that is also, I don't know who mentioned this, but this is very important because that is also one problem.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen the statistics where Serbia is on which place in the world with considering the arms, the legal and illegal and really it's shocking. It's really shocking. So this is part of the prevention also.
This is prevention. Yeah. Yes, yeah. That is also a prevention, definitely.
It is. How should I say, maybe oppressive prevention, but it's something that will definitely decrease a lot of...
It's not only about illegal possession, according to this law on firearms, you should have regular checks, yes. And checks, medical checks, psychiatric checks, etc. Yes. But does that apply in practice?
No.
No. So that is very often you do have good legal solutions, but in practice, who ask you, I have a gun for 3 decades, nobody remember to call you and say, but you should be checked,
Yes.
in different terms to see whether you are capable of on keeping this firearm, etc. So there are legal solutions, but in practice is different.
But also to repeat, promotion of the peaceful conflict resolution culture, which is not culture of violence, but a culture of peaceful and friendly relationships. So the culture of overcoming the culture of violence will be within education from the primary school on, within the family and upbringing of kids, within media, within the public sphere, etc., etc. So peaceful conflict resolution, because conflicts, also gender-based and intersectionally based conflicts, are something unavoidable, but different, completely opposite culture should have been promoted instead of promoting by intention, intentionally or without intention, really, for example, in our society, in a progressive way, the culture of violence, so violent discourse and violent reactions and behavior.
I completely agree with this, what Professor Dragica said. I would just like to add one explanation that relates actually not generally to violence, but to homicide, since that is my discipline to say, that civilization processes do to large extent affect this rate of homicides. And if you look at, for example, our homicides rate before 50 or 60 years, and the rate of killed females before 50, 60 or 70 years, you would be surprised to see how many females were killed and males as well. And some say this is a civilization, to learn how to resolve your conflicts by avoiding physical aggression, and then after that verbal aggression. The first step to stop using physical violence. The second would be then to learn people how to behave in a communication, not to be aggressive. But this is one important theory, understanding why through all Europe these rates of homicides in past centuries have decreased. And many say this is a civilization, of people.
I wanted to impose a question. Can we compare the situation of women's homicide in the 90s, taking into consideration the situation in the country then, the challenges that we dealt as a society, and nowadays? Can we have this causal connection between this social, I can say...
if I understood good, is it possible?
Is it possible, and can we conclude that there are more women that were killed then or nowadays, these 3 past years?
Definitely in that period we had more crimes and violent crimes and homicides and everything. And the explanation is simple, because you went through all of this. If you want to look at so long trends, how to say, in past several decades, you will then say at this particular moment we had an increase, and you give explanation. That is what you should do, to give explanation. Of course, that circumstances have changed, and all of that affected the crime rate. And the situation today, of course, better than it was in 90s. But, that is something that you should expect, because you don't live in such circumstances. But it would be interesting, for all of you to see what was, for example, the situation back in the 60s or 70s. So it was higher than in the 90s. Higher. Interestingly, this. But not to go so back in the history. I gave you therefore I gave you on the first presentation data for the last 15 years. I think that is something, from the moment when we enacted this criminal code is something that you should also take into account. Probably no many differences in legal solutions that were enforced through all of this period. This is something that also has to be taken into account.
Where do we have access to this data in a long line? So the last decades, especially, I'm interested now that you covered the period, that you mentioned the period 60s and 70s.
I have one published article, published, and you can find it on the ResearchGate on the internet. It is homicide in Serbia in comparison to other European countries.
Can I upload that on Moodle?
But it is open access, everyone can see that.
Can send it to
yes. All right, if there are no any more questions or comments, well, since this was the pilot master, this was also the opportunity for me to see, what I can explain in this long period of almost 3 hours and a half. I prepared other things as well and issues, but obviously I think that this is a better solution to focus maybe on some topics and then to try to evaluate them, to ask students to discuss and comment, than just to go through all of what was written in this article, Gender Perspective in Criminology. But you will see that there are many other issues as well. So it was really a pleasure to be not just in project, but today here with you and with all other online participants. And I hope that the next year we will also have interested students, because I was really surprised to see how many. That's great, because young people are interested to learn, to hear something new. And I just have to say that I hope that it will be a similar situation next year. So thank you very much for your attention.